Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It's Sunday night, April 26, 2020. We are winding up the month of April. It's only going to get better from here. I like the summer. I like the heat. Gets about 95. I feel comfortable. I hope you're comfortable tonight. We've got a lot of things to talk about. A lot of things have happened this week. A lot of stuff in the news. Not the least of which is the COVID-19, but that's starting to wane, isn't it? Starting to go sort of the other way. I have an article about a Mississippi church. I've entitled it, "Are You Running Amuck? We Just Simply Don't Understand the Law." A Mississippi church has had their congregants sued. I have to start that over again. That doesn't make sense at all. A Mississippi church had a bunch of people in their church who came to church, drove up in their cars, parked in the parking lot so they could listen on the radio, I assume. And the police came around and charged them all with a crime, fined them $500 for attending church. Not allowed to do that. The U.S. Department of Justice has recently filed what they call a statement of interest in this particular case. It's signed by the Assistant Attorney General and 4 other U.S. attorneys. Filed in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Mississippi. It starts off by naming the church, Temple Baptist Church, and all of the plaintiffs that are involved in this versus the city of Greenville. The court has found, 1, that constitutional rights are preserved during a public health crisis. Secondly, that the Free Exercise Clause prohibits unequal treatment of religious individuals and organizations. And thirdly, that the compelling interest, the least restrictive means test, is a searching inquiry. Those are the principles upon which this conclusion has been based. They write, "The United States respectfully requests the court to consider the arguments set forth above in evaluating this case. The facts alleged in the complaint strongly suggest that the city's actions target religious conduct. If proven, these facts establish a free exercise violation unless the city can demonstrate that its actions are neutral and apply generally to non-religious and other religious institutions, or satisfies the demanding strict scrutiny standard." As I mentioned to you, this is all built off the fact that members gathered in their closed vehicles in a parking lot to listen to services. Nobody got out of their car, windows were up, air conditioning was on, and yet they all got a ticket, fined $500. Church in western Kentucky has experienced the same thing. This is just people in power, in authority, running amok, running all over the Constitution, all over your rights, just because they can. In other news, Dr. David Katz, a doctor, former clinical instructor at the Yale School of Medicine, has written an op-ed in the New York Times. He did this back in March 20th, entitled, quote, "Is Our Fight Against Coronavirus Worse Than the Disease?" End of quote. Katz points out that building immunity to the coronavirus is critical for bodies to fight off the infection. He noted that, quote, "deaths have been mainly clustered among the elderly, those with significant chronic illnesses such as diabetes and heart disease, and among those in both groups. He feared that our efforts will do little to contain the virus because we have a resource-constrained, fragmented, perennially underfunded public health system. End of quote. Now, Katz is a founding director of the Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center in Connecticut. He added that quarantining everyone at home simply increases mingling across generations that will expose the most vulnerable. He suggested that governments focus their resources on testing and protecting in every possible way all those people the data indicate are especially vulnerable to severe infection. He lists the elderly, people with chronic diseases, and the immunologically compromised. He wrote that protecting the truly vulnerable is critical, but at the same time, returning to a somewhat normal way of life could develop natural herd immunity to the virus. Herd immunity is when the population collectively builds an immunity to an infectious disease by being infected, recovering, and developing antibodies, which eventually slows the spread. Oh, and of course, this is what we have always done until now. We are in uncharted territory with this disease and the treatments we're providing. We have no idea how this is all going to work out. It's never really been done before. And guess what? We're still here. We survived all these other diseases without once doing any of the things that we're doing with this one. Oh well. There's a Michigan State representative. Her name is Karen Whitsett. She's a Democrat. She contracted COVID-19. Her doctor prescribed a malaria drug touted as effective by President Trump. Karen recovered from COVID-19 and publicly thanked the president. Her reward for doing that is that the Michigan Democrat Party censored her. Apparently, after contracting the coronavirus, Whitsett's doctor prescribed the hydroxychloroquine, a malaria drug that Trump has touted as effective in fighting COVID-19. When she was recovered from this, she traveled to Washington, D.C. to thank the president. Thank him for bringing attention to this drug. And when she did that, the wall came crashing down on her head. She said, "I started out with a simple thank you to the man who is the President of the United States. It's a thank you. I didn't know that thank you had a political line. I think it was just me as a state representative that I was out of line, according to possibly our governor," she said. A kind of how dare you, because the person who is in charge of the 13th Congressional District actually works for our governor. Michigan Democrats want to censure Whitsett for later meeting with Trump and Vice President Pence, as well as for criticizing Whitmer's governor's stay-at-home orders. She said, "I started out with a simple thank you to the man who is now the President of the United States. It's just a thank you. I didn't know thank you had a political overtone. I think it was just me as a state representative that I was out of line, according to possibly our governor," she said. "Taking myself and going to Washington to speak with this man was kind of a in-your-face, how dare you do it." On Saturday, Detroit Democrats voted unanimously to officially censure Whitsett. Whitsett says, "I'm not going to stand by and be quiet, nor will I be silenced by anyone when it comes to the people in my community. I don't care who it is. If you're not doing right by us, if you're not doing right by black people," Karen is black, "within our community, I'm going to stand up, and I don't care who it is. I'm going to stand up against you. I'm going to speak out, And right now, I'm speaking for the people who cannot speak for themselves. I don't care who it is. I will go up against the governor any day, because I'm guessing she doesn't care. As an aside, another 4.4 million filed for unemployment last week, according to the Labor Department. That data was released this past Thursday. That makes a total of 26 million Americans who have filed jobless claims. Under the heading of Who Knew, donations to some churches have plummeted, and many charities have had to cancel crucial fundraising events such as galas, bike races, and walkathons. Who knew that galas, bike races, and walkathons were in the Bible? That this is what churches do? And oh, by the way, our church's finances haven't suffered at all. Democrat Representative from Milla J, no, her name is not J, it's J. Paul. I separated the syllables because I didn't know how to pronounce it. From Milla J. Paul. Anyway, she's from Washington State. Admitted that she and her progressive colleagues have been blocking legislation aimed at providing relief to small business workers in order to hold on to political leverage. The Congresswoman made the comments during a virtual news conference just last Monday with fellow progressive lawmakers and activists. They were pushing for illegal immigrants to be included in the next round of coronavirus relief, among other Congressional Progressive Caucus priorities. We don't know what's in the package yet, she said. We only know what's been reported. But I think what you're hearing from all of us on this call is that we have real concerns about giving away leverage right now without getting some of the priorities we need. The Senate Republican Communications Center posted a video of her remarks on Twitter, writing, "Think about that. Democrats would rather use workers as partisan leverage than actually help them." Apparently, conservatives live in states with fewer cases of coronavirus and consume far more skeptical coverage of the virus threat, while liberals, especially in big cities, experience more death and consume far more ominous coverage. You saw this when President Trump announced via Twitter a ban on legal immigration, an extraordinary move, by the way, that most Republicans will rally around. 3 southern states, Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, all run by Republicans, say they would open beaches, restaurants, and most businesses. Flattening the curve is now one of the most contentious issues in politics, according to the New York Times. Jeremy Peters writes, guns, abortion, voting rights, and religious expression have emerged as fault lines in the debate over how government is responding to this crisis. So like everything in modern America, it appears most dimensions and interpretations of the virus will quickly devolve into Fox versus MSNBC food fights. What makes all this more extraordinary is that it's unfolding when most of us see the virus and returning to work as a big risk. According to NPR, at the start of the year, a barrel of West Texas Intermediate crude, key benchmark for U.S. oil prices, was around $60 a barrel. But on Monday afternoon last, oil prices hit an all-time low, dipping below zero for the first time in history. By Friday, prices dropped to just $18 a barrel. On Monday, the price fell to a negative $37.63. That means traders are paying $37.63 for somebody to accept delivery of their oil. Other types of crude that don't have an impending deadline have not yet dropped that sharply. But if this continues, they probably will. Traders blamed the drop on the expiration of the May futures contract on Tuesday, coupled with a sharp decline in demand amidst the coronavirus shutdowns. While May has taken a hit, June futures are currently trading above $20 a barrel, but the limited amount of storage space will continue to be a concern as days and weeks pass without oil being used in its typical fashion. Oil is already being stockpiled on barges out at sea and in any nook and cranny companies can find in their storage facilities. Now traders are worrying that even this space is running out, according to the New York Times. In its report of the news, CNN warned that the downturn could result in hundreds of U.S. oil companies going bankrupt. A news agency, I assume a TV channel over in the Netherlands, something called 24 NYT. It's a Danish news service, and it's reporting just today that the Danish Bible Society just published a revised translation of the New Testament. The new translation is called Bible 2020, and it has a lot of different surprises, including a new name. They call it the New Agreement. But even more shocking is that the New Agreement has all but removed any references to Israel, whether it describes the land or the people. Think of that, a Bible that doesn't mention Israel. Rabbi Welch told Breaking Israel News, quote, "The translation of the New Testament is an important reminder that replacement theology is not a problem of the past." Not going to talk about the land or the people where Jesus walked. The land and the people that consume the entire Old Testament. It's like they don't exist. That's where liberalism takes Christianity. The U.S. Constitution does not mention the Bible. It doesn't mention God. It doesn't mention Jesus or Christianity. And the First Amendment clarifies that, quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting any establishment of religion," end of quote. And yet, some scholars still argue that the Bible heavily influenced American founders. A Pew Research Center survey entitled "Half of Americans Say the Bible Should Influence U.S. Laws" included 28% who favor it over the will of the people. Something that shows about half of Americans, 49%, believing that the Bible should have at least some influence on U.S. laws, including 23% who say it should have a great deal of influence. The whole thing breaks down with U.S. Christians wanting the Bible to influence U.S. laws, at least to some degree. 68% of U.S. Christians. 89% of white evangelical Protestants agree with that. At the other end of the spectrum, there's a broad opposition among religiously unaffiliated Americans. These folks are called religious nuns, not N-U-N, but N-O-N-E-S, identifying as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. Roughly 3/4 of this group, 78%, say the Bible should hold little to no sway, including 86% of self-described atheists who say the Bible should not influence legislation at all. 2/3 of U.S. Jews think the Bible should not, or should have not much, or should have no influence on laws. All the survey respondents who said the Bible should have at least some influence on U.S. laws were asked a follow-up question. When the Bible and the will of the people conflict, which should have more influence on U.S. law? The more common answer to this question is that the Bible should take priority over the will of the people. That view was expressed by more than a quarter of all Americans, 28%. I realize that's not a high percentage, but it was the highest of any that were polled. That was the most common answer. The other answers varied. About 1 in 5, 19%, say the Bible should have at least some influence, but that the will of the people should prevail. There were 2 religious groups standing out for being especially supportive of biblical influence in legislation, even if it meant going against the will of the American people. 68% of white evangelical Protestants took that position. Half of black Protestants said the same thing. It was only among Catholics that the number dropped down, and it went to 25%. While just over a quarter of white Protestants do not identify as born again or evangelical, and yet they share this perspective. The survey did not ask people what they had in mind when thinking of biblically influenced laws. It's possible that some of them were thinking of biblical marriage, defined by some Christian leaders as a marriage between one man and one woman, precluding same-sex unions. Recent surveys by the Center find that most white evangelical Protestants, 63%, and half of all black Protestants, 50%, continue to oppose legal same-sex marriage. You wouldn't know that listening to the news, watching television, or the movies, or anything else. We've been hearing all week, or a little bit longer than a week, that Jong Un over there in North Korea is either dead or he is almost dead. It's gone back and forth this week. People saying, oh yeah, others saying, nah, it's not really like that. But late this week, according to the Los Angeles Times, the Daily NK, assume that's for North Korea. It's a Seoul-based website that gathers information from informants inside the isolated nation, reported Tuesday that Kim underwent a cardiovascular surgical procedure and was now mostly recovered. The article went on to say no one has seen him since April 11. That's 2 weeks ago. The outlet noted that it was, quote, impossible to immediately verify the report, which the Daily NK said was based on one person inside North Korea. A White House reporter for Bloomberg News tweeted that, quote, Trump administration received information that Kim Jong Un had heart surgery this week, and if he's alive, his health is very poor. Taiwan News reported last Monday that the dictator was in a vegetative state after bypass surgery. Apparently the surgeon was nervous, and it took 8 minutes to place the stent. Putting in a stent is not bypass surgery. I went into the hospital last year for a stent. They didn't do it. 2 or 3 weeks later, I was in for bypass surgery. They cut you open. They take veins from your leg and they put them in your heart to bypass whatever the plug up is. They say his weight isn't helping at all. A normal time to insert a stent would have been about 2 minutes. They took 8 minutes, and hands nervous. And during this period, Kim Jong Un became vegetative. That's their phrase, not mine. After the arrival of the Chinese medical team, Jin Jingyan was diagnosed and treated, but the conclusion was nothing can be done. Kim Jong Un has not been seen at key events in recent days. It's unclear to officials just exactly what his condition is, dead or alive. But the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Hyten, said the U.S. military had, quote, no reason not to assume that Kim was still alive and in control of his country. Reports are that the Trump administration officials are looking into who would be the next in line if Kim Jong Un dies or is already dead. Of course, he may just pop up in a few weeks, good as ever, and the world is scrambling to be ready for the worst. Against the advice of frontline agents, the federal government opened a temporary immigration detention facility that was barely used and cost us $66 million to operate. And that was just for 5 months. During that time, the tent encampment situated in a rural West Texas community near the Mexican border housed an average of 30 detainees. That, according to a federal audit, an audit that blasts the Department of Homeland Security for the waste. Though it has a 2,500 person capacity, the facility never held more than 66 illegal aliens on any given day. Not only did Customs and Border Protection pay a private contractor tens of millions of dollars in facility costs, it spent about $5.3 million for food services, the preparation and delivery of meals and snacks to people who were not there, something they did not need, but these people had a contract apparently, and they fulfilled their contract, and we paid them. In one example, investigators write that during the first 3 months, the government paid about 675,000 meals, despite ordering only 13,428. The U.S. also leveraged significant federal personnel resources that added up to an additional $6.7 million. This includes 75 unarmed guards to monitor the camp around the clock, and officers from DHS agencies such as Customs and Border Patrol, the Border Patrol itself, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as soldiers from the National Guard. Investigators did the math and figured that each illegal immigrant detainee that stayed at the camp was guarded by 4 soldiers, 3 security guards, and at least 1 CBP agent. So what's happening now? Well, the border has been shut down because of the coronavirus. And this particular outpost apparently is going to be dismantled, we hope. This is your government at work.